Welcome to our video study of Daniel chapter 3. This study is being presented by the Charlotte Church of Christ. We meet at 5327 South Tryon Street in Charlotte, North Carolina. My name is Bob Pulliam and I'm going to be your host for this study. So I'd like to invite you to grab an Old Testament and follow along as we study Daniel chapter 3. I've given this chapter a title like I'm going to do with all of the chapters of Daniel. I've given it the title, God Delivers Those Who Trust in Him. Does God really care about a people after He has punished them? I believe it's human nature that once you're punished, you kind of get the feeling that the person inflicting the punishment didn't really care that much about you. I think maybe we felt that way a few times while we were children, didn't we? We just wondered if dad or mom that, oh, you don't love me anymore and things like that. And the truth is, while God had punished them and had done so very severely, He did so because He loved them, and there was an overall plan in it all as well. This idea of God caring about His people in the midst of this punishment, it's not new to Daniel. It's addressed elsewhere. For example, in Habakkuk chapter 1, we have this addressed very specifically. Habakkuk, we begin the book and there is a wonderment about all of the violence and the iniquity in the land and how can that go on. And the answer comes back beginning in verse 5, I'm raising up the Chaldeans and they're coming and they're going to punish. And then as if it's not enough that God has given the answer to that, we have Habakkuk coming back and he's wondering, how can you let those punish those more righteous than themselves? And so pick up a reading with me here at Habakkuk 1 and verse 13. Thine eyes are too pure to approve evil, and thou canst not look on wickedness with favor. Why dost thou look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why art thou silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? And he's talking about the Chaldeans. How can you sit idly by while the Chaldeans swallow up a people who are more righteous than they are? And Habakkuk struggles with this idea in the book of Habakkuk. And there are things that Habakkuk doesn't understand, but he does come to a realization that God is the Holy One, He is righteous, and all of His ways are pure. We may not always understand what God does, but we can be sure and we can trust that God is always doing what is best and what is wisest. We have to deal with the troubles that beset us in this life. We may feel that the troubles have come from Jehovah, and that may or that may not be the case. Not everything's going to come from Jehovah. Talked about this a little bit in the introduction. Time and chance do happen to them all, according to the wise man in Ecclesiastes. And so there are times when evil is going to beset good people. And some of the times that'll be time and chance. There are times when it may be for our good. It may be to our gaining wisdom. It might also be Satan. Satan seeks to slay us, and before he's going to drag us down into the grave, he wants us to curse God. So we need to always trust in God and realize that terrible things are going to happen, but God always seeks what is best for us. Here in Daniel, a related problem to this doubt that might arise is the idolatry that surrounds the people of Israel. If they lose their confidence in God, then where are they going to turn? Well, they're going to turn to the idols of the people of the land. If God doesn't care about us, then maybe the gods of the Babylonians will care about us. And so there seems to be a dilemma for the Israelites, and yet they need to realize that this whole thing is already answered. It's answered in the trustworthy nature of God, which their history had proven for far too long for them to be doubting right now. Now, what we need to realize is that there are circumstances we face in this life, and we need to learn lessons from this. The first lesson is really a difficult lesson, and yet it's one that if you just stop and think about it, you realize that, yeah, that's exactly right. And that is, just because you or I have confessed that Jehovah is our God, that does not necessarily mean that all other gods have been banished from our lives. You know, when I look to Daniel here in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 47, Nebuchadnezzar is a great example of this. Here's a king who has come to realize better than anyone else in that court what Daniel has just done, because Nebuchadnezzar was the one who had the dream. He had the dream. Daniel related what the dream was. He gave the interpretation of the dream. And now in verse 47, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Surely your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries." And so what we expect Nebuchadnezzar to do from this point on is to abandon all other gods and only serve Jehovah. It doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way at all. Nebuchadnezzar just added another god to his arsenal. That's the way he's thinking. We imagine that Nebuchadnezzar, well, he's going to proselyte over to the Jews now. No, not even close. Nebuchadnezzar just has another god to add to his arsenal. And if we didn't realize that at the time in chapter 2, when we come to the beginning of chapter 3, we have idolatry still on his mind. And it's not that the author of Daniel is contradicting himself, that at the end of 2, Nebuchadnezzar throws off idolatry. In the beginning of chapter 3, here he is in it again. It's not a contradiction at all. You have to understand the mindset of the Babylonian. And Nebuchadnezzar never threw off idolatry back in chapter 2. And that becomes evident here at the beginning of chapter 3. Now something, and that, by the way, that's true in our lives. You know, we can profess Jehovah, He is our God, we trust in Him, and then we have our gods. It may be the God of money, and we just don't serve Him the way we ought to serve Him because we're too busy making a buck. It may be the God of popularity. We profess our God, Jehovah, we profess His Son, Jesus Christ, and then we go out in the world and we want to be popular with the people around us, and so we talk the way they talk, we dress the way they dress, we act the way they act. Another God has caught our attention. We need to understand that while we may uphold Jehovah and Jesus Christ, we may not have banished the other gods of this world from our lives, and we need to work on that. Now, also, we have the choice between serving God and fearing mortals. We have to fear God and serve Him in the face of any and every threat that may come against us. And so whether it is an employer, whether it's a king, whatever it might be, we have to serve God over and above all of these and never allow them to deny our God by doing what they do in disobedience to our God. Now let's turn to the events here of chapter 3 and look exactly at what is going on here. Now, if you've already looked at chapter 3, it may have struck you as interesting that there is similarity perhaps between chapter 3 and chapter 6. In chapter 6, officials induce the king to make an edict whereby Daniel will have the choice of either praying to his God or praying to the king. And if he prays to his God, he's going to be thrown into a lion's den. Well, here we have these 3 young men, and they're faced with the choice of either staying true to God by not bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue, or fearing the king and bowing down to his statue. It appears here that the enemies on this occasion are trying to destroy these faithful men. Look down at verse 8. The way that this is worded leads me to believe, and this is just an opinion, we don't have anything explicitly stated for us here, but it says at the beginning of verse 8, "For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews." And so it appears that maybe they haven't induced Nebuchadnezzar to come up with this, but they're going to use it to their advantage. And it's for this reason at this time that they are coming forward and bringing charges. These three men, they have attained power. It looks to me like these men are jealous of them, and so they're going to try to destroy them. When we see the outcome of all of this, it's all about who are you going to serve. God delivers those who trust Him, is really what comes out of all of this, as we're going to see going forward. So we begin here in chapter 3, and we see Nebuchadnezzar setting up the image of gold, this great image. He commands them to worship it. They're commanded to worship when they hear all manner of music that is played, that becomes the cue for them. In verse 7, we find that they do actually fall down, the end of verse 7, and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And so these individuals who come to Nebuchadnezzar to tattle on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they come to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar is angry. Verse 13, he's in a rage. He's angry. And so he has these men brought before him. I want you to notice here that he does not punish them without verifying what has been told him. So there is some reason here within him. You know, some would just go ahead and off with their heads. But he asks them in verse 14, is this true? And in verse 15, he gives them a chance to prove that this is not true. Now, he has forgotten who their God is. Now, he's not forgotten about Jehovah. I cannot believe for one moment he's forgotten the events of chapter 2. But arrogance is a funny thing. And Nebuchadnezzar is full of it. And being full of arrogance, it has made it very easy for him not to forget the God of these four men, but to forget who he actually is. And so when we look at the outcome of this, they're going to refuse to do this. Look at verses 16 and 17. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Okay, so God delivers those who trust in him. But they realize that God hasn't said he's going to deliver them from Nebuchadnezzar. So notice verse 18. They go on and say, but even if he does not, they're not presumptuous here. They're not presumptuous to think that, well, we're indispensable to God, so God is going to save us from the fiery furnace. They say, but even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They know that they are going to be delivered from the king one way or another. Either God will, in some miraculous way, or possibly providential way, he's going to deliver them, or if they die, there's nothing more that Nebuchadnezzar can do to them, and then they will be in the hands of a God to whom they have been faithful and trustworthy, and they know that he is trustworthy to them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is so angry here in verse 19 that he is going to have them heat the furnace 7 times more than it is usually heated. You know, some of the times when we get really angry, we do things a little bit backward. The reasonable, or maybe I should say logical thing to do, if you want to punish these fellas, don't heat it up more. Put them into it slowly. Make them suffer as they go. You heat it up 7 times more, boom, they're going to die instantly and it'll be over. But the conventional wisdom of anger is to just make it hotter, just make them really burn. And that's what he's going to do here on this occasion. In fact, we're told that it is so hot that those who bring the men and carry them to throw them into the furnace, as they get close to the fire slays those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we don't have to guess whether or not the furnace was hot enough to kill them. There's something else here too. Someone could say that, well, you know, they were in a cool spot here, and they were just in a part of the furnace that didn't burn them up. Well, there are a couple of problems with that. The first is that they are being carried up by these men, and if it kills the men who are carrying them, then it's going to kill the men who are being carried. So they are tied up and they're being carried in, and the guys carrying them die from the heat, but the people being carried don't die. That doesn't make sense. Also, further on, we find that their clothes, they're not burned, the hair, not singed. We find that not even the smell of smoke is upon them. No, there's a miracle here. That is not reasonable in any natural context, because this could not have been accomplished in a natural way. Then it is a miraculous event. And so in verses 24 through 27, Nebuchadnezzar is astounded when he sees them. They're walking around in the fire. But he asks the officials here, was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, certainly, O king. And he says, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. So Nebuchadnezzar comes to the door of the furnace, calls them to come out. They see the result, that the effect of the fire has not come upon them in any way, and so it's obvious that a miracle has taken place. They're smart enough to see that. Who was the 4th individual in the fire? Well, it would appear that an angel of the Lord. Some have tried to take a translation of verse 25 to make this the Son of God, and so Jesus came and he was in there. The text doesn't really say that. You have to be careful that you not put words into Nebuchadnezzar's mouth that's unreasonable. What does he know about the Son of God? So we need to translate it the way a Babylonian would view it in order to keep it true to what is intended by the speaker. And Nebuchadnezzar's not a Christian. And he's not even a Jew. But he does see something. And what we find in all likelihood is the Lord sent an angel in order to protect them on this occasion. And so I want you to notice as we come to verse 28, we have really the main point in this whole thing. And just like back in chapter 2, the main point comes out of Nebuchadnezzar's mouth. Nebuchadnezzar says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him. And that's the title of this chapter. He delivered his servants who put their trust in him. And so we have here a wonderful incident, a miraculous occasion. And it shows to every Israelite that they need to beware of fearing the king and make sure that they fear their own king, that they fear their God, because he is a God of God and a Lord of kings.